Hi everybody, today we've got a tier ranking, and this is going to be for all 50 states for how compelling they're going to be in the 2024 general election. Now, a lot of the weight is going to be for president, because that's going to be the most significant, but also I'm going to factor in Senate and governor's elections as well. And for certain states, the U.S. House could be a little bit of a factor as well. So I've got tiers A, B, C, D, and F. Some people love the S tier or the Z tier. I kind of like to keep it simple, and you're going to emphasize different things and have your own rankings. But let's get into this to find out which states are going to be the most compelling or the most exciting or interesting, however you want to put it. The first state is going to be Alabama. I'm not expecting anything competitive in this state. Democrats are probably going to pick up another seat in the House, but overall this is going to be in the F tier. Next, we've got Alaska. This state, I do want to see the trends at a presidential level. And there's no U.S. Senate election, but their lone U.S. House election, that could be something to take a look at. I think that's going to be enough to get this up into the C tier. Next, it's Arizona. This is going to be super competitive for president as well as in the U.S. Senate. So that's going to put this right at the top. We're going to put that in the A tier. Next, it's Arkansas. I'm not seeing much excitement here. I'm going to put that at the bottom in the F tier. Next state is California. There's no governor's election here, and for president, it's not going to be competitive. There is a U.S. Senate election that could be exciting in the primary, but in the general election, it's very unlikely that's going to be anything to take a look at. But California does have a lot of U.S. House districts. Some of those are probably going to be competitive and could change the balance of power. So for that, we're going to put that not on the bottom. We'll put that in the D tier. Next, we've got Colorado. There's no Senate election here. There's no governor's election. The only thing to take a look at here are going to be the trends on a presidential level and probably a couple of House districts. So for that, that's going to be enough to put it one up from the bottom in the D tier. Next, we've got Connecticut. This one is close to the F tier, but there's potentially a competitive U.S. House district here that might be enough to just barely bump it up to the D tier. It's borderline. I'm going to put Connecticut in the D tier. The next state, it's Delaware. There is a governor's election here. There is a Senate election, but in the general election, apologies to my Delaware friends, I'm just not seeing it be competitive as of yet. So for now, this is going to have to go in the bottom on the F tier. The next state is Florida. Even though it's probably not going to be competitive for president, we do want to take a look at the trends. There's no governor's election here, but there is a Senate election that could theoretically be competitive. So there's enough here to put this next to Alaska in the C tier. Next state is Georgia, and this is going to be competitive for president. But this time there is no Senate election here. There's also no governor's election. So Georgia is definitely a state to take a look at, but just not quite enough there for the A tier. We're going to put that in B. Next, we've got Hawaii. And this is an extremely blue state. There's not really anything to look at here. However, some people do want to see the trends after the fires in Maui. Some people have said it's going to trend hard right. I think it could go a few points to the right. I don't think it's going to be that much. So outside of that, this is a slam dunk for the F tier. But for those people that do want to see the trends, I'll be nice. I'll bump this up to the low D tier. Next, it's Idaho, and there's nothing happening in this state that's going to go in the F tier. Illinois is next. No Senate, no governor's election. Outside of a couple of House districts, there's really not much action expected in Illinois. That's going to go in the F tier. Indiana is also not expected to be competitive, but they do have a Senate and a governor's election here. Even though they're unlikely to flip, that's going to be enough to keep this from the bottom. We're going to throw that in the D tier. Next, we've got Iowa. In the past, this state used to be competitive, but this time it's expected to go to the GOP. There's also no governor or Senate election here this time, but I don't think it's going to be all that compelling. It's kind of borderline CD. We'll put that in the high D tier. Next, we've got Kansas, and the only thing really to take a look at here might be the U.S. House seat with Sharice Davids, but I don't think that's going to be enough to save this from the bottom tier. Next is Kentucky. That's also not much action. We're going to put that on the bottom. Louisiana is next, and they just had their statewide elections. There's no Senate election here. The most excitement here is probably going to be in the U.S. House with their new map, but that's just not enough. That's also going to go on the bottom tier. In Maine, that state should not be competitive for president at large. The 2nd Congressional District, that's going to be the one to take a look at, even though it's expected to go to Trump. There's no governor's election, but there is a Senate election. I think seeing what happens with Jared Golden is enough for me to put this into the high D tier. Next state is Maryland, and in the U.S. Senate, the Democrats are going to have a competitive primary. In the general election, this is normally just way too blue of a state, but now that we have Larry Hogan in this thing, I still think it's going to go to the Democrats, but it's definitely something I want to take a look at. That might be enough to actually put this just barely into the C tier. Next, we've got the Bay State. That's Massachusetts. As far as the general election goes in this deep blue state, there is nothing to see here, and that is going to go on the bottom tier. How about Michigan? Well, that's definitely going to be a competitive state for president, and they also have a U.S. Senate election there as well. The Democrats are probably favored in that, but it's still going to be exciting to take a look at. So that's going to be borderline A-B. But I guess with the two potentially competitive races, that's enough to throw this up into the A tier. Next, Minnesota. There's an outside chance this state does get competitive, but I think the biggest thing to take a look at here are going to be the trends. Maybe one or two of the House districts. That's enough to get this probably just above the D tier into the C. Next, Mississippi. That's a red state. Not much to watch here. We're going to put that in the F tier. Missouri is next. This has become kind of a solid red state at this point, but they do have a Senate election as well as an open seat for governor. So I think there's enough there to take a look at. Enough to avoid the bottom. We'll put that in the D tier. Next, we've got Montana. And this one, everybody's going to be watching for the U.S. Senate. It should be extremely close. For president, not so much, but that's enough to put this pretty high up. We'll put that in the B tier. Next, we've got Nebraska. The only thing to watch here is going to be that 2nd congressional district with Don Bacon. Should be a good rematch with him and Tony Vargas. There's also 2 Senate elections here. It could change, but as of right now, it doesn't look like they're actually going to be competitive yet, but all that is enough to put this in the D tier. Next, it's Nevada. This is competitive for president as well as in the Senate. That's easily going to make this compelling enough to put in the A tier. Next, we've got New Hampshire. I'm not expecting this to be competitive for president. There's no Senate election here, but there is a governor's election. That's going to be the thing to take a look at. Maybe one of the House districts as well, but that's pretty much borderline C-D. But because I'm interested in that governor's race, I'm going to put that in the C tier. Next, it's the Garden State. It's New Jersey. The trends might be something to look at here as well, but the main thing is going to be the U.S. Senate election. I don't expect it to be competitive in the general, but maybe the Bob Menendez scandal lingers on, and there's probably going to be 1 or 2 competitive House districts, so that's enough to keep this off the bottom. We're going to put that in the D tier. Next, we've got New Mexico. There's 1 actually competitive House district here. There is a Senate election that doesn't look like it's going to be competitive. The main thing is probably going to be the overall trends. That's going to be enough to just barely put this in the D tier. Next, we've got New York, but I think the U.S. House is going to be the thing to look at here. It's going to be enough to keep this off the bottom and into the D tier in this otherwise blue state. Next, we've got North Carolina. This should be competitive enough for president. No Senate election here, but definitely a competitive governor's race. That's going to put this in the B tier. North Dakota, that's next. That's not really going to be competitive, even though there is an open seat for governor, and there's a Senate election here, and probably another open seat in the U.S. House. It's just too red. I don't think much is going to happen in the general election. It's going to go in F. Next, it's Ohio. And the huge thing here is, of course, the Senate election with Sherrod Brown. That's enough to put this close to the top, but just one race is going to keep it in the B tier. Next, we've got Oklahoma. That's a red state. I don't think there's much compelling here at all. That's going to go in the F. Oregon is next. It's kind of the same story. There could be 1 U.S. House seat here, but I don't think that's enough to get it off the bottom. That's going to go in F. Now we've got the Keystone State, Pennsylvania. Competitive for president as well as in the Senate. We want to see the trends. That's enough to put this at the top. This is going to go in the A tier. Rhode Island is next. That's a blue state. This is a state I don't think I'm going to be spending much time on election day. That is going to put it in the F tier. Next is South Carolina. Maybe something develops in the House. Otherwise, this is going to sit next to Rhode Island in the F tier. South Dakota is next. That's also going to go on the bottom in the F tier, as well as Tennessee. There's just nothing compelling about these states in the general election. You could stretch and try to make a case in the U.S. Senate in Tennessee, and maybe it does change in 4 or 5 months. But right now, it's going on the bottom. Next, we've got Texas. Here we've got Ted Cruz in the U.S. Senate. That's going to be a race to take a look at, as well as the trends overall in the state. South Texas and the suburbs. For president, it probably won't be competitive, but you never know. But I think there's enough here to put this actually up into the B tier. Next, we've got Utah. There is an election for governor and Senate here. I think it's going to be more exciting in the primary. The general should not be all that exciting. So with a potential third-party vote split, that's going to be enough to put this in the D tier. Next, it's Vermont. And this is one of the bluest states out there. But because of Phil Scott, I think that's going to be enough to put this 1 up from the F. If he ends up retiring, then there's going to be an open seat for governor to take a look at. If Scott does run, he should win easily. But then I want to see what kind of a margin he puts up. So I'm going to put that in the D tier. Next is Virginia. There's a Senate election here, but the Democrats are favored. It should be fairly blue for president. I think there's going to be just barely enough here to just have this get into the C tier. Washington, D.C., there's nothing to look at here. This is going on the bottom. Washington State should not be competitive for president or for the Senate. However, there's an open seat for governor there. And even though it's a blue state, there's an outside chance of an upset there. So that is something I actually do want to take a look at as of right now. Also, there's definitely at least one U.S. House seat here to take a look at. That is enough for me to probably put this just barely into the C tier. Maybe you think that governor's race has no chance of being competitive, so I understand if you put this in a lower tier. Next, we've got West Virginia. They're going to have all their elections this year. They're just not expected to be competitive at all, but because it looks like they're going to be open seats, that's going to be enough for the D tier. Wisconsin is next, and that is definitely a competitive state for president as well as in the U.S. Senate. Democrats are probably going to start with a slight advantage, but there's definitely a lot of action in Wisconsin. That's going to be one of the states everybody's going to be taking a look at. The last state is Wyoming. No surprise, super red state. It's going to go all the way on the bottom in the F tier. So that's it. Those are the tiers. And this is not easy to do, but I try to fill it out as fairly and as consistently as I can. Some of these are borderline where you could bump them up or down. And of course, you're going to have your own reasons for your own tiers. But these are the states I think are going to be worth taking a look at. Definitely in A and B, probably a bunch in C as well. And for tier D, I'm going to glance at a few of these states throughout the night. But this is just what I think is the most compelling. Let me know in the comments. How would you rank these states? Do you agree with the A tier? Do you disagree with some in the F tier? Let me know down below. On your way out, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Join if you'd like to support the channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.